LEED v5 is the newest version that USGBC has released, and we are in the rating system has been approved. We went through some public comment periods, but now it is available for projects to register. Starting later this year, you will actually be able to apply for certification and submit projects, but so far you can't actually submit projects quite yet. The sunset of LEED v4 is not going to be until end of Q1 2026. So that means you have until then to register projects under LEED v4 or 4.1. And after that, you'll have 6 years to certify those projects. So we've got some time, and you have about 6 months now to figure out what projects you want to keep under v4, but you do have the option to upgrade to 4.1, or sorry, up to v5. And as Katie mentioned, Greenbuild is coming up in about a month, and we're expecting a lot more information after that, some of the credit forms to be available, and additional education and documentation. So lots new in v5. This is a non-exhaustive list, or we would be here all night. But one of the big things is you really are pushing for greater flexibility for projects, more opportunity for change, but maybe a little bit more complicated. So 5-year development cycles to give a little bit more stability, platinum requirements, and a new project priority library. So v4, and then we had version 2009 before that. It was a little bit uncertain when the next version of LEED was coming, and it got kind of hard of people getting nervous about new versions, kind of hard to prepare for that. So USGBC has moved to a 5-year cycle. v5 came out in 2025, and v6 will be in 2030. So once v5 is approved, it'll start kind of moving to the next version. But the hope is that it creates a little bit more stability and provides more options if maybe we couldn't get this included in v5, but we want to think about it for v6, and we kind of have the next step of when that's coming. If some of the ideas that people had to include weren't included in this version. There are also platinum requirements. So you still have prerequisites that are required for minimum levels of certification, but all projects that are targeting LEED Platinum have to have these credits. All are in the energy category, or in the carbon, or they're related to carbon. So electrification, enhanced energy efficiency, renewable energy, could be on-site or off-site renewables, and a reduction in embodied carbon. So that's kind of setting the bar high for platinum projects, that if you're platinum, you have met these things and you've really focused on decarbonization. And the project priorities library. So previously, this was kind of the innovation and design and regional priority category, but this has been revamped a little bit to focus on regional credits, but also project type credits that are specific to different market sectors like schools or warehouses. And then you'll still have exemplary performance, pilot credits, and innovation credits. So that's more similar to what you had in v4 and 4.1, but this library is always growing, and it also gives USGBC the opportunity to, as new things come up, to add things to that library that projects can implement on their specific projects before we get all the way, to version 6 in 2030. So with v5, there's 3 main impact areas: ecological conservation and restoration, quality of life, and decarbonization. These are the big through lines, with the biggest emphasis on decarbonization. But when we look at all the different credits, you'll really see these 3 through lines and how everything is related back to these 3 things. So this is our v5 scorecard for building, design, and construction, so new construction projects. And the categories are largely the same as what you saw in v4, but with a few new things. One of the other new things is that there's an alternative version of the scorecard. So these are all the same credits, but this divides the credits into 3 categories: decarbonization, quality of life, and ecological conservation, those 3 impact areas. So you can see exactly where each of those credits ties back to. Some of them show up in more than one category. In fact, a lot of them show up in more than one category because they touch on each of those areas. But if you download the scorecard from USGBC, you can kind of toggle back and forth between the 2 versions. That gives teams, I think people are more used to seeing this from a consulting perspective. But when you're looking at things a little bit more holistically, it kind of ties back to this scorecard, and so you can use both versions. Another change is that these are the v5 rating systems that are available right now. Under LEED B, D, and C for new construction projects, we just have new construction and core and shell. Under v4, there was a lot more system variations with LEED for schools and warehouses and healthcare. That's kind of being simplified. There are some specific requirements for those project type variations within the credit language. So, for residential projects or schools might have some additional things that you have to do under a credit or a prerequisite, but it's not an entirely separate rating system that you need to certify under. And then we have interior design and construction and operations and maintenance. A few other things. So we'll talk about the prerequisites in a second. There's new assessment prerequisites in the integrative process category, but really providing a design framework for projects that are around decarbonization. That's a topic that we're hearing a lot about, but some teams are having trouble with how do you actually do that. And so the idea here is that LEED's provided a framework for assessing that, and to look at quality of life a little bit more holistically from the human experience and health benefits that are tied to your project as well. And we're not going to talk a lot about O&M, but the O&M rating system was released a little bit earlier for existing buildings, and the idea here was to make it a shift from policies to more of assessments, and to make it a lot more transparent. If you certified projects on ARC under V4.1 for O&M, you put a lot of information and you got a score back, and it was a little hard to tell where that score came from or how you could improve your score. So this is a lot more transparent and hopefully giving project teams the ability to target higher levels of certification for their existing buildings if they want to. So from our perspective, a few big changes. No more LEED Online for V5, which people may be more or less happy about, but everything was going to the new ARC platform, and that'll be where projects are certified and documentation is submitted. We have fewer rating system variations, as we mentioned, so just new construction in core and shell for BD and C projects. They've also reintroduced credit numbers, so that was kind of in version 2009, but it's kind of a simpler way to refer to credits. And a lot of the credits have been really streamlined with lots of options, which gives you more flexibility, but more complicated credit tracking. So this is the IEQ credit for occupant experience, with all these different options and pathways within the options for ways to earn points. So in some ways, it gives teams more flexibility for, if let's say you can't meet the acoustics requirement, it doesn't mean just that's one point that you absolutely can't get. You have a lot more options for ways to achieve points, but it's going to make things a little bit more complicated for project teams to keep track of when you have, 7 or 8 different ways within one credit that you're able to earn points, to kind of keep track of why did we say that option's not possible, or which ones do we want to make sure that we pursue, and just kind of keeping track of that. I think it's just going to be a little bit more complicated, but does give projects more flexibility. And there's required credits for platinum, as we already mentioned. So one of the biggest changes, aside from energy, which I will let Ross talk about, is 3 new prerequisites in the integrative process and planning category: climate resilience assessment, human impact assessment, and carbon assessment. You still have the integrative process credit that we had in V4, and then there's a new credit for green leases just for core and shell projects that you get points for putting, sustainability requirements in leases for tenants. The climate resilient assessment requires projects to assess the climate and natural hazards for the projects. So you have to look at all of these for your project, and this is required for all projects. You choose an emission scenario. There's a workbook, kind of a spreadsheet that you fill out, kind of evaluating the current and future hazard levels for all these different parameters. And then you're looking at, the vulnerability of the population of your building, exposure risk, sensitivity, and identifying the top 2 hazards. And then you have to put together a narrative about how you could address those hazards. This prerequisite doesn't require that you implement all of the things that you've identified, but the idea is that it's making project teams stop and think about some of these things. If, maybe we don't need to worry as much about landslides in Baltimore City, but we need to think about flooding, depending on, if you're building a project in Fells Point, we should probably think about flooding, and wildfire smoke, hail, different things like that. So we're looking at all of this, and you have to consider it and put together a narrative, and then those top 2 hazards will come up in other optional credits later as kind of ways to implement some of this into your design if you choose. The human impact assessment is looking at demographics, local infrastructure and land use, human impacts, and the occupant experience, and kind of balancing the environmental and sustainability goals with the people in and around your building. So not just the occupants inside your building, but also the people in the community surrounding your building, and making sure that they're not disproportionately affected by your project either. Again, you're doing the assessment, you're pulling all the data and putting together a narrative about how you could implement some of these things if you choose. And lastly is the carbon assessment. So you're doing a 25-year carbon projection. This is not a whole building LCA. It is a kind of simpler number that you get to. There's plenty of credits that address, a much more building specific carbon projection, but you're looking at emissions from operations, refrigerants, and embodied carbon. And it ties into all of these credits, which Casey will talk a little bit more about. But as you notice, these 3 prerequisites touch on those 3 impact areas, and this is going to be a big change that all projects need to start very early on. These are supposed to be done in concept or SDs, so projects need to start thinking about this early. And it ties through into a lot of other credits. So again, there's credits in the sites category that rely on what you assessed in the climate resilience assessment. And it doesn't say every project has to do this flood mitigation measure. It says every project has to assess their top 2 hazards and address those. So if you haven't done that, it's going to make things a lot more challenging. Location and transportation looks fairly similar to the way we had it in before. These are all the credits, but I'm not going to talk about all of them. But a couple of things that I think some noteworthy changes: the transportation demand management credit requires projects, if you want that point, to assess vehicle miles traveled to the site. So where are people coming from when they're coming to my building, and how are they going to get there? And still has options for reduced parking footprint and bicycle storage and changing facilities. One thing I think project teams will like is that they've separated the requirements for bike storage and showers, which lots of projects have lots of bike storage, but having 4 or 5 showers was sometimes a limiting factor for earning that credit, and maybe their populations weren't using 4 or 5 showers, they only needed 1 shower. And they've also added an option for bike maintenance equipment, so putting in some options for you see them sometimes in parking garages or apartment buildings for things to fix your bike, pump up the air and the tires, to kind of really set yourself up for that bike infrastructure. So that's also an option for a point. And electric vehicles, we still have options for installed EV charging or EV ready spaces. There's 2 different thresholds, so you can get an additional point for putting in more EV charging, and that requirement is different for residential projects. It's higher for residential projects than it is for commercial projects. So that's another change there. The sustainable sites category, again, a lot of these credits look fairly similar. The minimized site disturbance, so erosion and sediment control prerequisite, has been upgraded significantly. We were on the EPA 2007 general construction permit before, and this has been upgraded, so it's going to require more frequent site inspections to make sure that your erosion and sediment control plan is in place. Either you're inspecting it weekly or after every rainstorm, and you need proof of that. So this is going to be a little bit more for contractors to make sure that they're following that plan. Looks like I've got biodiverse habitat on there twice, but rainwater management, they've upped the thresholds a little bit more back to kind of closer to where they were for V4. Those were kind of dropped a little bit in V4.1. And that enhanced resilient site design credit is kind of what I mentioned. Whatever your top 2 hazards were that you identified in the climate resilience assessment, you need to do something to mitigate those, but trying to open it up to not just, we know that sustainability is not one size fits all. What makes sense in Arizona may not make sense in Florida, which may not make sense in Michigan. So what can we identify as the biggest priorities, and doing things that make the most sense for the project. There's also a new option under heat island reduction for tree equity score. So you can look up the tree equity score for a project, and if you're in an urban area that's identified as a high hazard level, increasing the tree canopy can also help you get this credit instead of just focusing on the hardscape and roof materials, to kind of look at that again a little bit more holistically, and that benefits the greater neighborhood as well. Our water category looks fairly similar. The minimum water efficiency kind of prerequisite, again, these are combined into indoor water and outdoor water, have all been grouped together for minimum water efficiency, and then enhanced water efficiency also includes that process water requirements. But water sense fixtures are strongly encouraged, but are no longer explicitly required, which is a change. And one of the big pushes for the enhanced water efficiency is the whole project water use calculations, instead of just looking at indoor water, outdoor water, and process water separately, but doing more of a holistic water model for your whole building, all the water that gets used. It's a pilot credit option in V4. We've been using it, and I think people are often really surprised at, wow, irrigation uses a lot more water than we thought, and how much that impacts like the overall water use of your building versus, you know, the sinks in an office building are not quite as much as, you know, when you compare all of that. So they're adding some new options there. Water metering and leak detection. So not just having options for water metering, but putting leak detection in on things like irrigation to, you know, identify when you have issues. You know, you can't fix what you don't know. So trying to identify some of that. I'm going to skip over the energy category and turn that over to Casey in a minute. So jumping to materials and resources, this is another area where we do have some big changes. So planning for zero waste operations still requires recycling in projects, so single stream recycling and, you know, batteries and e-waste, but also requires you to put together a plan for setting up for zero waste operations in the future. It doesn't mean your project has to be zero waste right now, but it's putting together some training documents for your staff, or you know, setting up for composting, things like that, to try to, you know, build out the infrastructure or the training for your teams to, or your projects to target zero waste down the line. There's also a new prerequisite for quantify and assess embodied carbon. So again, this doesn't have to be a full-blown LCA, but you are looking at building structure, enclosure, and hardscape, and kind of doing a rough assessment of the embodied carbon of your building. If you want to do the whole building life cycle assessment really in detail, look at tracking reductions in embodied carbon, that ties into the reduced embodied carbon credit. And there's a lot more points available for that. But there's also a pathway for projects to use product-specific EPDs and do kind of more of a prescriptive approach and look at, you know, those EPDs for some of the materials instead of building out the entire model. And you can get a few points for showing reductions in embodied carbon there. So encouraging, you know, projects that may not have the budget to do a full LCA or to be able to, you know, do that detailed model, but to still consider embodied carbon. Low-emitting materials has been moved to the materials and resources category for tracking purposes. And then the building product selection and procurement was previously the environmental product declarations, material ingredients, and sourcing of raw materials credits have all been combined. And this is now category-based. So, and it's weighted scores. So if you've got, you know, building products that have an EPD and a declare label and recycled content, those count for more than others. And you have to get a certain score in different categories that kind of align with the low emitting materials. So insulation, ceilings, flooring, things like that, to get points there. But we're still doing some construction tracking the same way. And construction and demolition waste management is really pushing project teams towards site separated waste. There was some different options in, you know, V4, but you're only able to take credit for a small amount if you're sending everything off to be sorted off site. So they're really pushing teams to site separate materials and send them to a specific location that handles that material to make sure things are actually getting recycled. And our IEQ category, the construction IEQ management plan is now a prerequisite. So this was an optional credit in V4, but requires you to have an IEQ management plan during construction. And you know, we're looking at housekeeping, no smoking inside the building during construction, things like that. But that does have to be followed as part of the prerequisite. The fundamental air quality prereq has been upgraded to ASHRAE 2022. This also has a few other changes. It allows you to use the ventilation rate procedure as an alternative to just using the ASHRAE standard for outside air requirements. It requires MERV 13 filters or air cleaning equipment as a mandatory for the prerequisite. So that was not the case in all projects. And it requires walk-off mats at main building entrances as part of the prerequisite. So again, no longer optional. They took away the 10-foot requirement, but you do have to have them at main building entrances. So that is, yeah, they say regular, or I think they call it regularly used entrances. So it doesn't say every single door the way it did in V4, but it does. They're going to push you to at least the main entrances, and how much you want to argue with USGBC about which entrances are regularly used. So there's a couple of big changes there to that prerequisite. Otherwise, that occupant experience credit was one that I showed on the other screen, but that included a lot of things like daylight views, acoustics, lighting quality, thermal comfort. So all of that is kind of grouped into that big occupant experience credit with some new options for biophilic design. And then we have new options for accessibility and inclusion and resilient spaces. So looking at, you know, accessibility and inclusion, looking at things like they have a bunch of different categories, but the stair treads being different colors, having lactation rooms. There's like social health, physical health, health for aging, wayfinding signage, all kinds of things like that you have a big list to choose from. And then resilient spaces is either looking at indoor air quality during events of, like, if you have like wildfire smoke or something like that, making sure that you can preserve indoor air quality during episodes where you've got poor air quality, or preserving the temperature in the building during power outages and making sure that that building is still occupiable during that time. And with the air quality testing, we now have options for permanent air quality monitoring instead of just doing a one-time air quality test, and that there's options for that here. And then we already talked a little bit about project priorities, but these are kind of different categories, and this list, there is a library that's available already on USGBC's website, but that list is being continually added to for those project type priorities, for schools or warehouses, different buildings, regionally, and projects in Alaska have different requirements than in Hawaii, and kind of trying to account for some of that. And then we still have exemplary performance, pilot, and innovation credits. So really high level of a lot of the changes, but with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ross to talk about energy.
All right, thanks. So the big picture about changes from LEED v4 to LEED v5 in terms of energy are three things. You only need to know three things, and it's the same solution for LEED. It's the same solution for newer Maryland energy programs that are coming out, especially in Montgomery County. Electrify your building, use heat pumps, do it on day one. If you just remember that, you're good to go. So there's from a paperwork standpoint, I think one of the biggest things that we're going to be seeing different in LEED 5 versus LEED 4 versus earlier editions of LEED is the energy model. That's always kind of the elephant in the room. It's this big chunk of points, and everyone's worried about it, and it comes in out of a black box, and you're like, well, where did this come from? It usually comes in late. It usually comes in at the end. There are probably about a dozen credits and prerequisites in LEED v5 that are related to the energy model. They're not the energy model specifically. They're connected to it, that have to be done in early design. So putting in that last minute, let's just get the engineer to throw this together, is just not going to fly. And here's how that's going to go. So the overall credits here, we got the commissioning credits, fundamental and enhanced. Those are mostly the same. There's little nuances to it, but they're pretty much the same. The energy metering, we need to sub-meter our energy usages in the building. Any energy source that's 10% of the building's energy profile, you need to sub-meter. The energy model will help back that up, but we kind of have good feels to where that is. That's all pretty much the same. With the refrigerant changes from the Kigali agreement that us MEP engineers are very familiar with, that is now updated into LEED. So if we've been working with those kind of things, which we have been, that's not all that much different. The language is a little bit different, but the business as usual is pretty much the same for enhanced and fundamental refrigerant management. The big change, of course, is in here with the electrification. There's an entire credit that just is give you LEED points for electrifying your building. This has to go, you're allowed to use natural gas for this credit for temperatures that are very low, below 20, which is not, I don't think that's very low. I wanted it to be lower. But the general idea is that you need to be using heat pumps to heat your building, both on domestic water and on HVAC side. There we go. So from the energy model, in LEED v4 and prior, we're used to this energy model being 18 points, this massive elephant of points that just comes in and barrels in. It is now down to 10. And you say, oh, well, is the energy model less important? Absolutely not. It is way more important. As Haley kind of mentioned, one of the big pictures of LEED 5 was also there are a lot of different pathways. So it is easy to enter into. It is hard to master. It is easy to find a path for your building, no matter what kind of building you have. Every building's a new snowflake, right? There's always a path for your building to satisfy LEED, and it was purposely designed that way to give maximum flexibility. But to find that strategy that gets you the correct way, the most efficient way to get to a LEED certification, that is much more complicated. All of these credits that I'm talking about, these can all be done prescriptively. So if you have a small single-family home, a 2,000 square foot little museum, something in that range, and you're like, oh, am I going to pay all this money to get someone to do an energy model? Probably not. It's probably not worth it. It's probably worth it to do the prescriptive path. And LEED 5 allows you to do that. But when you want to have a single turnkey operation that says we're going to do this model, it is going to affect 12 different credits, and we're going to maximize our credits all across the board, that's where this really comes in, and you get the maximum amount of your benefit. So right off the bat, the model is used for your energy performance. That's the usual thing that we're used to. It is also used in a prerequisite where early SD or earlier modeling must be used to show a carbon projection and decarbonization plan, showing how the building, if it's not already decarbonized, if it's not already all electric, how that is going to be that way in the near future, how you're planning that out. Also in another category, in the integrative process category, now the energy model is affecting this other range, the carbon assessment, where we're taking a look at the embodied carbon, the carbon that goes into building this building, and also the operational carbon related to the energy usage and how that affects over the lifespan of the building. We're also playing into the integrative process and enhanced, oh yeah, these are connected. So the integrative design process and the enhanced energy efficiency, those are things that we've been doing already. We're showing that the model has been used, or trying to show that the model has been used as a discussion tool with the building owner. And then where we're seeing newer things is in a integrative process for green leases. So if you're doing core and shell, showing how this energy model affects the green lease and tells future tenants how they must install their fit out to be able to keep the whole building's energy profile in the same category. And then we're also looking at a new credit, the reduced peak thermal loads. When we're talking about the building, you know, your MEP engineer is out there and they're designing for resiliency and for reliability. And what that ends up happening is all of your schedules start getting higher and higher and more over designed. So then we use the energy modeling to look at the block load. What happens when the sun is shining on one side, but not on the other? What happens to the whole building as a whole? And how do we use our design to reduce the peaks? Because part of the problem about this electrification is we're talking about things like in the winter, if we're all electric, does our electric bill go sky high because we're trying to heat with all electric? If we can reduce the peaks, if we can use things like thermal battery storage or even more electrical battery storage, can we use that to shave those peaks down and avoid insane transmission costs that would be needed to upgrade everything to be all electric? All right, here we go. And then annual kilowatt hour usage from your energy model is affecting how your renewable energy credit is put in, and that's kind of what we've been using for standard practice in LEED before and earlier, where we say, hey, we're going to buy some solar and put it on the roof. How much % of the building is? That's where we get this credit. We will also be using the energy model to talk to the grid interactive credit. So that is a credit designed to plan for future interactivity with your electrical grid, where they say we have a high peak demand, can you reduce your building? Again, trying to find those ways that we can start integrate battery storage and other ways of flattening the electrical curve. We also look at the energy model for the reduced embodied carbon and operational carbon, and for occupant experience in terms of how the % of energy gets distributed throughout the building. So you can see just like a whole list of things that all interact and all come out of that energy model and cycle back to it. I mentioned that the energy model total percentage is going down in terms of having points. So yeah, we're only going to get 10 points maximum from that. And then all of these secondary induced points from other categories. So here's the breakdown. They have a breakdown from just energy savings from 3 to 30, and then savings if you count on-site renewables. So if you have solar onto your building, then that has a different metric to it to be able to get these savings, because solar and other renewables are also incentivized in the renewable energy credit. So we don't want to double dip too much. And that gets you your 10 points. So in the technical aspect, energy modeling before LEED 5 is all about utility cost. And one of the things that we run up against, and to the frustration of some, is that natural gas for 20 plus years has been just so cheap. We keep running up against that and say it's not the way that we want the 2025, 2030 buildings to be designed. We want them to be all electric, clean, and using heat pumps so they use the electricity efficiently. So LEED v5 is now changing the metric from energy cost to source energy. So this is the energy created at the utility plant. It has a prescriptive factor of 2, so the amount of energy you use in your building is doubled to account, or excuse me, the amount of electricity that you use at your building is then doubled to account for how much loss there is in transmission lines and power generation, and the natural gas is just added as is. And then there's custom building performance factors. So again, things for the baseline as to how we measure what your baseline is going to be very LEED specific. So you're going to need to look up LEED specific data to be able to see how that baseline is. It's going to be a bit of an integrative process to be able to go through all of that. Central plants are going to be are being revised so that you can take better efficiencies or better capture the efficiencies of central plant equipment a little bit better. Previously, central plant energy was done on a one-to-one basis, and now they have guidelines as to how to model the central plant energy to be able to better take care of that or better capture that. And then the savings here you see in this chart, we have one chart for source energy savings, one chart for source energy savings with renewables. If you've been doing LEED since the March 2024 energy update, you might be thinking, well, where's the greenhouse gas savings? That has now been eliminated. So the real effect of that is that off-site solar RECs, are no longer going to be really a factor in your energy performance. Oh, and so we have a couple example projects. So these are real projects that we've done here at Lorax, and we've gone through some version of LEED 4 for all of these, and we already had the numbers. And going, being how LEED has put these together, we can take the numbers from the baseline we proposed that we've already calculated, put them through a little bit of a rubric, and see how they would fare under the LEED 5. Without having to reinvent the wheel. So here is an actual building. This is Yellow Brick Road warehouse. It's outside of the Beltway a little bit. Under LEED 4, it was passing fine. It's kind of bog standard. They've got rooftop heating units. They've got a little bit of front area with kind of honestly off the shelf HVAC. That's kind of a minor part of it. Most of the energy savings we saw was lighting that they just stumbled into designing a good one. And that was fine. But however, in LEED 5, when we crunch all these numbers, this just straight up fails. This will not pass because all that heat, the building energy of this building is, about 40% of its lights, about 40% of its the heating, and then all the other stuff is kind of in the middle. So with that much heating energy, all that natural gas is not doing any favors here at all, and it's just flunking this building. So here is King Elementary. This is over in DC. This is in permits right now. It's a renovation in addition to an elementary school in Washington, D.C. It is geothermal heat pumps. It is sorbic air filtration. It is upgraded envelope to all the existing. It's everything we want a building to be. And predictably, and warms my heart, this is passing at maximum LEED points with 32% savings. This building also has some solar onto it, but I kind of discounted it just for this discussion.
Question.
Yeah.
It says 430,000 versus 78,000.
Right.
Why
That's
is
for
it
the
more?
electricity. Because the
I
the
see the natural
baseline,
gas.
yeah,
Okay, got it.
baseline in our climate zone is natural gas heating.
Got
Yeah. So that, and that's yep. Oh, I love talking about that. So that's where we see, we might see like energy costs. Well, actually, energy cost came out really high on this baseline, but that's where we're seeing the savings is from the elimination of natural gas. Here's Twin Brook office conversion. This is over in Rockville. It's over in our Montgomery County area. It's an old office building that they just kind of started saying, hey, we need to do something with this. No one's going into the office anymore. They turned it into apartments. And we're in permits for this too. So this is another one that's doing fairly well. We got 7 points out of this, 7 out of 10. Not too bad. This has all electric HVAC. This has all electric domestic water, but it's resistance electric water. Resistance electric hot water. And I think that's where we lost the points. If we had heat pump hot water heaters or something centralized like that, that we'd probably be able to pick up on it. The envelope got improved too, so that helped out a little bit. So that's where we're sitting for that. And that's nothing crazy. This is a fairly typical project. And then here are some hypotheticals. So we said, now that we've run through this, what are some, let's make a hypothetical energy model and see how it stacks up. So here is an example residence hall or multifamily, a place where a lot of people are living, kind of in an apartment building. And we said, all right, let's site it in Baltimore. It's a 4/1. pretty bog standard to what we got, but you know, we're going to do a little bit better. We're going to have improved envelope. We're going to beef up the windows and the insulation in the walls a little bit. We're going to have all electric heat pumps like everything. We're going to do those heat pump domestic hot water heaters that I love. And in the common areas, they'll do VRF. They'll do a high efficiency VRF system. And what does that get us? Unsurprisingly, 10 points. That's awesome. This is what we wanted to see. And this isn't something revolutionary. This isn't some like new technology that we're trying to push here and say like, oh no, you need to reinvent the wheel. You need to have something that is a guinea pig of design that you're worried about. This is pretty bog standard. You just need to push a little bit. But there's always a budget. So what if you got rid of the heat pump hot water heaters? Those are always the ones that get cut first. They take up more space. You drop immediately. That takes 7 points off of this model, which is massive. So that's a really big thing here. If you go from heat pump to electric resistance, you're going to see a huge drop in your performance in LEED 5. Then if you start taking out the envelope and make the lighting not as good, you get down to 1. So you're still getting a point. You're still okay. You just all electric heat pumps for HVAC. You're good. You at least got it. You at least got through prerequisites. So then if you just go to all electric heat pumps, you're not doing anything for the envelope. You're not doing any special HVAC for the common areas. Yeah, what's up, man?
Does it matter how efficient heat pumps are?
It does. I modeled this at SEER 16 and COP of 3. And if you can get something better, you know, SEER 18 exists out there. If you did split systems that you can get up to like into the 20s, that makes a difference. Absolutely.
Do you get more points with better whole level performance? And that if the heat pump capacity at 17 degrees is much closer to the heat pump capacity at 47 degrees.
Yeah, I would say so. And especially, you know, taken from our area, one of the things that manufacturers and designers often look at first when they're looking at heat pump efficiency is they say, well, what's the SEER rating? What's the EER rating? That is generally the cooling rating. And while that's important, something like the heating, which is usually representative of COP, coefficient of performance, that makes a much bigger difference and is usually glossed over. So we have had some great success talking to developers in our work and saying, hey, you wanted a SEER 16 heat pump. We found another one by another competitor that has a better COP but still SEER 16. And you slide that in there and your energy efficiency goes way up. That goes into the refrigerant category. So that absolutely does. So as part of the minimum refrigerant monitoring and the enhanced, the global warming potential of the refrigerants that you're using is going to play into that. It's all going to be based on the newer like A32 kind of or R32 kind of refrigerants that are out there now. But, you know, and that also factors into the carbon assessments. So when we said the integrative process where you're developing embodied and operational carbon, what refrigerant you're using, and projected leak rates are going to be a big factor.
Very easy. And the system is part of that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So thanks very much for hearing us talk. We'd love to talk more. So why don't we, you know, take a break, get a snack and a drink, and let's dig into what's on your mind about LEED.